My name is Ron Gold, and this is the third in the series of the rise and fall of the Zulu nation as a military power, which I'm making here in conjunction with Three Tree Hill Lodge. In the second episode, we finished at the point where Shaka was installed with the help of his mentor, Dingizwayo of the Mthethwa people, and his old aunt, Mkabayi. He was installed as the chief of the Zulu people, illegitimately, in that the legitimate heir had to be done away with first. But now that Shaka was the king, the platform had been established, a position, a foundation, if you like, on which he could build. Shaka is without doubt one of the greatest of the peoples, or the greatest of the leaders of the indigenous peoples of this country, if not the greatest. And he becomes something of a legend. Now, the problem with legends is that one has to be very careful of what you believe about him. Anything that happened in KwaZulu, or Zululand at that time, is laid at the feet of Shaka. He developed this incredible new battle tactic, which we call in English the horns of the buffalo. He developed the new close-quarter stabbing spear, the ikla. Now, both of those statements are probably not correct. The horns of the buffalo, highly disciplined phalanx of infantry, was almost certainly developed by Dingizwayo of the Mthethwa, copying structures he had seen during the time he may have spent in the Eastern Cape. That Shaka refined it is quite possible. Similarly with the stabbing spear. Shaka almost certainly refined that and probably made it compulsory as a frontline weapon. But the reality is that the flimsy throwing spears had slowly been morphing into a more robust weapon for some considerable time. Anyway, what do we know of Shaka? What is the truth of Shaka? In my view, he was a consummate politician. The Zulu clan was a little clan, and he became chief at a time of incredible violence. The Mfecana was in full swing. Clans were falling upon clans for any number of reasons, looking for grazing and other issues like that. And at a time when many of these little clans, were gobbled up, Shaka manages to steer a path through them. And not only does he keep the Zulus isolated, but the Zulus become a place of refuge. And people start flocking to Shaka. And now suddenly, the numbers of his little clan swell. When he became chief, he could probably put an army in the field of 400 men. And over the next few years, this would grow rapidly. So, what else do we know about Shaka? We know that he ruled with iron discipline. And this is always a characteristic of great leaders, is that they set up structures and they are completely intolerant of anyone who operates outside those structures. And so Shaka will create, out of a informal missile-throwing mob, he will create a formidable, highly disciplined army, where for the first time warriors supported one another. They were not involved in a series of individual combat, but they were involved in looking after your comrades. If the front line of the chest of the buffalo, as they called it, was damaged, if warriors were killed, others automatically stepped into the gap. So, with this military structure, the Ndwandwe people were the power in the north, eventually swept down and clashed with their main rivals, the Mthethwa. And in 1817, only 2 years after Shaka had become the king, the Mthethwa was shattered and Dingizwayo was killed. But once again, Shaka didn't allow himself to be drawn into that conflict. He then sets about subduing all the clans and the peoples between the White Mfolozi River and the Tugela River. And in terms of extended families and little clans, there may have been upwards of 60 of them. But this basis of peoples became the material from which Shaka forged his army. Eventually, in 1819, there was a final reckoning with Zwide and the Ndwandwe, and the Ndwandwe were decisively beaten Zwide would flee north across the Usuthu River into Swaziland and would no longer present a problem. Shaka's reign continued, his territory grew, but his excesses of violence were starting to create problems for him. In as far as we know, 1826, he survived an assassination attempt, and as a result of that, moved his great place out of the traditional boundaries of Zululand to a new kraal called KwaDukuza, which is near the town of modern-day Stanger, not far from Durban. But shortly thereafter, 1827, Shaka's mother died. Now, he had a very, very close relationship with his mother, Unandi, from the time that Unandi had been expelled by Shaka's father from the Zulu people. And that had been a very, very powerful bond. And Unandi was an extremely influential and significant person in the developing of the Zulu nation. And on her death, Shaka seemed to lose it. He went into an orgy, if you like, of grief. He sent his executioners out all over the nation to murder indiscriminately, so that right through the nation, people were weeping. And it seems that this was probably a bridge too far. The same old Harridan, his auntie Mkabayi, who had engineered his ascendancy to the Zulu chieftain, now started to hatch a plan. And she drew in two of Shaka's half-brothers, Dingaan and Mhlangana, and they began trying to find an opportunity to do away with this tyrant. But Shaka looked after himself very well, and it was over a year before the opportunity arose, and one of the reasons why they would eventually be successful is that Shaka's arms bearer, the only man who could carry weapons in the presence of the king, Mbopa, was drawn into the plot. And the story is that in September of 1828, when emissaries from the Amaxhosa people were visiting Shaka's great kraal, for some reason he didn't receive them in KwaDukuza. He went out to a little satellite kraal called Inyaka Mubi, which for Latin scholars rather interestingly translates as Annus Horribilis, a phrase used by another world leader not that long ago. And it was at Inyaka Mubi that Shaka found himself isolated, exposed, and bursting through the reeds came the plotters, and within seconds it was over, and the reign of the first Zulu king was finished. And it is said that as he lay dying, he said to his assassins, "My brothers, why are you killing me? You will not rule for long, for the swallows are coming." What he meant by that was the swallows were the people who built with mud, the white people. And Shaka had never been in conflict with whites, but I think he realized that the day of reckoning was coming. And in the next episode, we're going to look how Shaka's successor, Dingaan, indeed came up against these whites, and what the consequences of that were.